Welcome back to our IB oral presentation. This is part 3, where we will be discussing arguments, mostly counter-arguments, perspectives, and we will also be concluding.
Yay!
So to kick off our counter-arguments, we have Hannah.
Right, so one counter-argument that can be analyzed in terms of this knowledge question is that it's not necessarily reason, or it's not necessarily schema and perception, but it's rather faith. And so essentially, many people believe in religions that have a strict code of dress and have a strict way that they want their pupils to present themselves. For example, in many in the Islam religion and in many Islam cultures, girls are asked to cover their hair, and boys are told to grow out their beards. And this is not for any reason of this is not perception per se, but it's just faith because they believe that that's what God would want them to do, and they believe that that's what's right morally. And it is similar with certain Christian religions, notably Mormons. They tell their people that modesty is the best course of action because it not only keeps them safe, but it also pleases God. So essentially, most of this has nothing to do with schema or sense perception, but it's more related to faith, and that they're faithful that it's what their God or whatever it is that they're following, it's like what their God would want them to do.
And it also applies, the counter-arguments apply towards sexism. There are many cultures that are sexist in nature, some more so than others, and that's where the dress code, you can see a difference. But it is also based off of how the older people of the society see the opposite gender, mostly female. So sexism definitely is an argument against dress code to protect the weaker gender in most cases, or to just keep the females safe in the community. So there's also the whole sexism, non-sexism argument, counter-argument that can be presented as well.
Additionally, you can look at it in terms of, in terms of the knowledge question, you could possibly argue that neither schema nor sensory perception have anything to do with dress code rules. And one example of this would be safety, because many of the dress code rules, as explained before, are for safety. And for example, we live in California, and we tend to have more lenient rules about dress code than states more inland in the Midwest have. And this is mostly because it doesn't get as cold here. And it gets very hot, in fact, and it would be unsafe to just ask girls to wear jackets all the time or to wear long sleeves, because in the summer heat, heat stroke is a possibility, and wearing long sleeves or jackets or jeans, it gives them a higher chance of getting dehydrated. And additionally, in areas that are not as safe, dress codes can also tend to be a little bit more strict, because there are people there that are more likely to be criminals and that could harm a woman because of what she's wearing. And so for that, it's mostly safety, and also just the fact that there are boys that'll see a girl who's not wearing a lot of clothes and have some not very nice thoughts, and this can be dangerous for women as well. So a big part of it could also be safety.
Right, and another part of why it's not necessarily reason that affects what people decide is that they're trying to avoid exactly what they create, in that it's the sexualization of young kids young girls specifically, and which we already touched on, but it's how these dress codes are created with the idea that these things have been marketed or shown as sexual on older people, adults, people who are above the age of 18 years, and how they don't want to see kids wearing that same thing. So it's not necessarily their schema, but it's just the environment that they live in. That's not the same as why that's reason, but it is though, if you think about it, which is why that's not necessarily a good counter argument, because it is 100% schema when it's sexualization of kids, because it's what they know and it's what they've experienced to be sexual, whereas kids haven't done that. They haven't had nearly that much life experience. So kind of is a proof that this is how this knowledge question is created and how dress codes and rules themselves are created. To continue.
That's me. As we mentioned before, there's a thing where with dress code rules, women obviously get the shorter end of the stick, but with men, they're also dress coded, and these are mostly for reasons of like gang related paraphernalia or like inappropriate logos on their shirts. I see a lot of boys at school, more so in the past than now, that wear like t-shirts of scantily clad women, and also they wear like saggy jeans and just like clothes that aren't seen as respectful. So
there's that whole stigma with what's available towards our generation of teenagers and preteens, and especially with young girls, what's marketed towards us isn't usually deemed appropriate by school dress codes, especially for the whole Hollywood scene in California. It's a lot of tank tops and short shorts and really just warmer clothes, because we're coming up to the summer months now, so all of what is being marketed towards young girls is stuff that they would wear to cool themselves off. However, that's not approved of by campuses, high school, middle school campuses. So it's all about what's available to young girls as well. So there's that big problem, especially in our generation. And there are clothes that are available that we can wear that will meet the dress code, but they're not marketed towards people like us. They're hardly ever marketed at all. You have to dig deep to find shorts that are longer than your fingertips. And that also brings into question the idea of uniforms and why some schools employ them as a means of dress code instead of having to come up with all these rules, especially because uniforms, they create a sense of uniformity. Uniformity, thank you. There's also the fact that with a uniform dress code where everyone's wearing the same thing, there's less danger about a student being ostracized for what he or she wears. But there's also the problem of it inhibits individuality. Mm-hmm. So uniforms have their pros and their cons, and it really just depends on the situation that the school, if the school is extremely prestige, they will most likely employ uniforms to help increase that sense of uniformity. But mostly, expressionism in young students is really important, especially for when we're growing into who we want to be. So uniforms kind of inhibit that sense of who we are as ourselves.
Right. Just to kind of sum up the counter-argument section, those examples are based on different things than schema. when you think about them, because faith is schema, but it's a different way of thinking than what reason is. And you don't really logic through those things, you just take them for what they are. And when it's things that are available, it becomes less of a question of reason and more of a question of possibility or impossibility. But what becomes a problem is what people know are available and what people know they believe. So that just kind of is a nice little segue into our next section on perspectives.
Okay, so perspectives. So when you are talking about this knowledge question, a big part of it, since we're talking about schema and that's like a portion of our knowledge question, it's important to analyze different perspectives, because that's essentially like what we're asking is how people's perspectives are different on this issue. And so when it comes to the concept of dress code, there's a big disparity between the perspectives of the teenagers that are being targeted and the perspectives of the adults that are setting these rules. So as we mentioned before, for adults, their schema is different, but in a sense it is a lot more than that, because so it is meant to be, for adults, the rules that they make, most of them mean well, and it is meant to be productive, and this is their perspective of it.
Protective.
Protective.
What did I say? She can't read my handwriting. It
Productive.
says protective.
Productive.
Protective.
They think that the way that they were raised is the right way. So their perspective is a lot different than the perspective of the teenagers who think that the rules that they're being given are baseless and shouldn't apply to them. So it is mostly this disparity that creates this conflict and makes this such a polarized topic.
Kind of is the stimulus for this presentation.
Yeah, and that's what caused it to be so thoroughly debated by so many people.
So, to conclude, dress codes have a base in safety and just avoiding any problems with students and faculty and other students. But the people who create them tend to have outdated perspectives, beliefs, and values that are no longer shared with the people they are enforcing the rules upon. And it just becomes a big problem in how we see these rules and how students like us can see them as outdated and somewhat ignorant and just, uncomfortable for us, whereas adults don't see it that way. They don't understand that there's more to it than just being safe and respectful. And then, so like when you're raised in the 70s, the clothes of 2017 seem vulgar. But when you're raised in 2017 and 1999, for some of us, these clothes are just our clothes. They're not strange. They're not revealing. They're just what they are.
They're what we wear,
Right.
to wear.